A causal argument is an argument which claims that something is caused by something else. It's an argument that communicates cause and effect. The claim in a causal argument will state the cause and the effect, and the evidence must either use examples to demonstrate patterns of correlation, or explain through logical premises how aspects of the cause directly lead to the effect. Here's an example of a causal argument through examples. The claim reads, the cultivation of corn caused Native Americans to be able to create larger permanent settlements. And I have three evidence statements here, which are each examples. The Aztec people cultivated corn and developed large permanent settlements. The Pueblo people cultivated corn and developed large permanent settlements. And the Anasazi people cultivated corn and developed large permanent settlements. With these three examples, I'm creating the generalization that Native American peoples who cultivated corn were able to develop large permanent settlements, which supports my claim. Here's an example of a causal argument through logical premises. My claim is the same, that cultivation of corn caused Native Americans to be able to create larger permanent settlements. But my evidence here, instead of examples, are logical premises. My first logical premise is that the cultivation of corn allowed Native American societies to develop a more stable food source. And then I've got another piece of evidence that says a more stable food source made Native Americans less dependent on migration to keep themselves fed, which allowed them to live in one place for longer times. Whenever you're dealing with causation and making causal arguments, remember, correlation between two things does not mean causation. While all instances of causation come from some correlation between two things, and you cannot have causation without correlation, you should always consider the multiple causes that could be possible behind a correlation. And remember as well that some correlations may be completely without causation, things we would call coincidence. For instance, here's an example of a correlation. People who are bitten by a specific kind of tropical mosquito called Aedes aegypti sometimes develop yellow fever. So we could say that there is a correlation between being bitten by these mosquitoes and developing yellow fever. What, though, are some possible explanations for this correlation? Write down your ideas in the following open-ended response. I can think of three different explanations for this correlation, and only one of which is actual causation. Yeah, you may have thought right away that perhaps this type of mosquito carries a virus that causes yellow fever, and causation is one possible explanation. However, it's not the only explanation. Aedes aegypti maybe just likes to bite people who already have yellow fever. Perhaps they can detect certain things in the blood of people who have this condition before they exhibit any symptoms of it. Yeah, we could also say that maybe yellow fever is caused by something else, and the two things, the two correlative elements here just have something else in common. Perhaps just being in the tropics makes you both more likely to contract yellow fever from something else and be bitten by this type of mosquito. So in that case, the correlation here is pure coincidence. In addition to there being just a natural logical danger of accidentally mistaking causation for mere correlation, this has actually been used to manipulate people as a sort of logical fallacy throughout history. A good example of this would be that throughout American history, racists have tried to argue that black people are genetically predisposed to having lower levels of intelligence, and therefore they are inherently less intelligent. The evidence that racists use is the correlation between being black and usually the aggregation of many, many years of standardized testing data, which does reveal that black people have historically achieved lower scores on those standardized tests than white people. Yeah, that was even a famous book written about this by Charles Murray and Richard Herrnstein. However, there are arguments that blackness has some inherent qualities that make black people less intelligent. That has been thoroughly refuted many times throughout history. The reason why this argument has been refuted is because there's many more explanations for this correlation that actually have a lot more logical merit to them. So what do you think? What are some possible explanations for the correlation between being black in America and achieving lower standardized test scores? Write your thoughts in the next open-ended response. Here are some of those explanations that actually have a lot more merit. First of all, we know that black people historically have been repressed in the United States, and at times even been barred from achieving the same levels of education as white people. After all, during the 250 plus years of slavery in our country, it was illegal to teach slaves how to even read and write. And even after the slaves were free, it took another 50 years before or more than 50 years before they were integrated into the same educational systems as white people. We also know that black people experience poverty in our country at a disproportionate rate, and people in poverty just don't have the same educational opportunities of those not in poverty. Clearly, someone in poverty can't afford to do things like go to college, but even before that, people in poverty have to have as many breadwinners in the family as possible. And if you're a teenager and you're expected to provide for your family, you're not spending as much time as you would like to studying for school. You have to, work your job. Thirdly, the American educational system has been proven to be very Eurocentric and biased toward white experiences. All of these explanations have much more merit to explain the correlation between being black in America and achieving lower test scores than some sort of specious argument about blackness having some genetic difference. When making causal arguments about history, arguing through example or through logical premises are both acceptable, and oftentimes you have to use a blend of both. You just want to be careful that you don't mistake correlation for causation or accidentally mix up cause for effect, and always make sure that your reasoning is clear. Finally, when studying causation in history, it's important to distinguish between primary and secondary causes. A primary cause is something that directly leads to the effect, while a secondary cause is something that may only create the conditions necessary for the primary cause to lead to the effect. So something that doesn't while a primary cause may push something to happen, a secondary cause may only create the conditions that allow for that thing to happen.